My name is Lieutenant Commander Jason Hart, and I need to tell you about the day we committed genocide. I'm recording this from my quarters on the CNS Retribution, 6 days after what Command is calling Operation Safeguard. That's what they're calling it in the official reports. A preemptive defensive strike against an imminent alien threat. Clean language for what we did. Sanitized words that don't capture the reality of watching an entire civilization burn. They'll probably court-martial me for making this recording. Maybe execute me for treason. I don't care anymore. Someone needs to say what actually happened. Someone needs to tell the truth before the official story becomes the only story. Before we convince ourselves we were right. The signal appeared 3 months ago. A transmission from a star system 42 light-years from Earth, Kepler 186, an unremarkable red dwarf with 5 planets. We'd known there was a civilization there for decades, had observed their radio emissions, tracked their technological development. But they'd never tried to contact us, and we'd followed the Outer Colonies protocol. Observe but don't engage. Then, the signal came. It was complex. Mathematical patterns embedded in electromagnetic pulses, repeating in sequences that our AI systems flagged as potentially hostile. I wasn't involved in the analysis. I'm a tactical officer, not a xenolinguist, but the reports that came down from intelligence painted a clear picture. The aliens were coordinating, building something. The signal patterns matched known weapon system synchronization protocols. Energy signatures suggested large-scale military construction. Predictive models indicated they were preparing for interstellar aggression. The threat assessment was unambiguous. Hostile intent, imminent action, existential risk to human colonies in adjacent sectors. We had to strike first. That's what they told us. That's what I believed. I'd been in the colonial navy for 8 years, fought in the Outer Rim conflicts, defended mining colonies from raiders, lost friends to violence in the Black. I knew what threats looked like, knew that hesitation got people killed, knew that in the void between stars, mercy was a luxury that could cost you everything. I'd seen colonies reduced to debris fields because someone waited too long to act. I'd pulled bodies from decompressed habitats because intelligence came 3 hours too late. I'd watched good people die because we tried diplomacy with raiders who only understood violence. So when they briefed us on Operation Safeguard, when they showed us the projections of what would happen if we didn't act, human colonies burning, millions dead, civilization itself at risk, I didn't question it. I should have questioned it. The fleet assembled at staging point Taurus 7. 12 warships, 4 carriers, enough firepower to crack a planet's crust. The largest military operation since the Consolidation Wars. Command wasn't taking chances. I was assigned to the Retribution, serving as tactical coordinator for the primary strike package. My job was to manage target acquisition and weapon deployment, to make sure our ordnance hits the right places at the right times for maximum strategic effect, to optimize the killing. We spent 2 weeks in preparation, running simulations, studying target intelligence, planning contingencies. The alien planet, they called it Verath in their transmissions, or at least that's what our translation algorithms suggested, had 3 major population centers and extensive industrial infrastructure. The briefings showed us cities, massive structures that reached into their red-tinted sky, road networks that connected urban centers across continents, what looked like agricultural zones in geometric patterns, massive structures near the equator that intelligence flagged as potential weapon platforms, all the markers of a thriving civilization, all the targets we needed to destroy. I remember studying those images during the preparation phase. The cities were beautiful in their own way, architecture that was distinctly alien, but somehow familiar. Buildings that curved and spiraled rather than rising straight up. Open spaces that might have been parks or plazas. Infrastructure that spoke of planning and purpose. I remember thinking they looked peaceful, then dismissing that thought as naive. Appearances meant nothing. Hitler's Germany had beautiful architecture too. Captain Morrison gave the final briefing 18 hours before launch. She was a career military, 26 years of service, the kind of officer who'd seen enough war to hate it, but do it anyway because someone had to. She had 3 commendations for valor and 2 scars on her face from a boarding action gone wrong during the Titan Rebellion. She was the kind of officer you trusted with your life. "This is a defensive operation," she told us, her voice carrying the weight of conviction. "Intelligence confirms hostile intent. If we don't strike first, they will. And when they do, it won't be a military target. It'll be civilian colonies, families, children." She paused, looking at each of us assembled in the briefing room. "I know this is hard. I know some of you will struggle with what we're about to do. But remember, we're not murderers. We're protectors. We're doing what's necessary to keep humanity safe. Every weapon we launch, every target we destroy, it's one less threat to our people, one less nightmare scenario where we're picking through the ruins of our own colonies." She pulled up an image on the screen. A destroyed habitat from the Outer Rim conflicts. Bodies floating in vacuum. Children who'd never had a chance to grow up. This is what happens when we hesitate. When we give threats the benefit of the doubt. When we wait for enemies to strike first. I will not let this happen to another human settlement. Not on my watch. Not while I have the power to prevent it. I believed her. We all did. She made it sound noble, necessary, the hard choice that leaders have to make to protect their people. And maybe it was. Maybe if the intelligence had been right, if the Verith really had been preparing for war, we would have been heroes, saviors who prevented catastrophe through decisive action. But the intelligence wasn't right. The transit to Kepler 186 took 6 days at maximum FTL. I spent most of it reviewing tactical data, triple-checking targeting solutions, making sure everything was perfect. The weapon packages were orbital kinetic strikes supplemented by thermonuclear devices, enough to destroy military infrastructure without completely sterilizing the planet. That was the plan anyway. Surgical strikes, minimize collateral damage, leave enough intact that we could establish a presence, prevent retaliation, maybe eventually negotiate from a position of strength. War with a conscience, they called it. I had dinner with Morrison on the 3rd day of transit. She invited the senior staff to her quarters, a small gesture of normalcy before everything changed. We ate reconstituted protein and drank synthesized alcohol and tried to pretend this was just another operation. "You ever wonder what they're like?" Lieutenant Davis asked. She was our communications officer, young and idealistic, despite 3 years in the service. "The Verith. What they think about, what they dream about." "Does it matter?" Commander Pierce replied. He was XO, hardened by a decade of combat operations. "They're a threat. That's all we need to know." "But they're people," Davis insisted. "Sentient beings with culture and history. We're about to destroy all of that." "To save our own culture and history," Pierce said. "That's the calculation. Them or us." Morrison was quiet during this exchange. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful. "I think about it. Every operation, I think about the people on the other side, whether they have families, whether they believe they're the good guys, same as us, whether they're afraid." She took a drink. "But then I remember that thinking like that gets people killed. Gets my people killed, so I compartmentalize. I do what needs to be done, and I deal with the guilt later. Because guilt means I'm still human, still capable of recognizing the cost." She looked at each of us. "When we stop feeling guilty about what we do in war, that's when we become monsters." I think about that conversation a lot now. Wonder if Morrison saw something coming that the rest of us missed. If she already had doubts but pushed forward anyway because doubt was a luxury we couldn't afford. Or maybe she was just trying to prepare us for living with what we were about to do. We dropped out of FTL at the system's edge, silent running, passive sensors only. The alien planet hung in the black ahead of us, a blue-green marble with streaks of brown continents and white clouds. Beautiful from this distance, peaceful. The red dwarf sun bathed everything in a dim orange light, making the planet look like something from a painting. Ethereal, distant. It's easy to forget that millions of living beings were down there, going about their lives, unaware that death was falling toward them from the sky. "All stations, battle stations," Morrison's voice came over shipwide. "Begin final target acquisition." I pulled up the tactical display. The planet resolved into a three-dimensional map with target markers overlaid. Population centers highlighted in red, industrial zones in orange, military installations in bright crimson. Except we weren't completely sure which structures were military. The intelligence was interpretive, based on energy signatures and construction patterns. Best guesses informed by human military doctrine applied to alien architecture. We were reading their civilization through the lens of our own assumptions, seeing what we expected to see, confirming our biases with selective interpretation. But we were sure enough, Command said, sure enough to kill. "Tactical, confirm strike package status," Morrison ordered. I ran the diagnostics. All weapons are green, kinetic impactors ready, nuclear devices armed and targeted, awaiting authorization. My hands were steady on the controls. My heart rate was elevated but manageable. I felt focused, clear. This was what I'd trained for, what I'd practiced in simulation hundreds of times. The fact that this time it was real, that actual people would die when I executed these commands, I'd compartmentalized that, put it in a box to deal with later, just like Morrison taught us. Authorization confirmed. Begin countdown. 10 minutes to launch. I watched the countdown timer tick down, watched my hands move over the controls with mechanical precision. Around me, the tactical center was quiet. Everyone focused on their stations, professional, efficient. No one was thinking about the people down there. The Verath waking up to another day, going to work, caring for their children, living lives that were about to end in fire and violence. We couldn't think about that, couldn't afford to see them as people. They had to be targets, threats, strategic objectives. Anything else would have broken us. At T-30 seconds, I had a thought that I immediately suppressed. What if we're wrong? But the countdown reached 0, and my finger activated the launch sequence, and the first wave of kinetic impactors released from our weapons bays. They fell toward Verath like judgment from an angry god. The impacts were visible from orbit. Flashes of light as tungsten rods moving at relativistic speeds struck surface targets. The kinetic energy alone was devastating, each impact equivalent to a small nuclear weapon, but without the radiation. Clean kills, we called them. I watched cities disappear. The first target was the northern population center. Intelligence designated it as a military command hub. The impactors hit in a precise pattern designed to destroy command infrastructure and communication networks. The explosions bloomed across the city like flowers made of fire. Shockwaves rippled outward, toppling structures, shattering anything that stood. From orbit, it looked almost beautiful. Geometric patterns of destruction, efficient and thorough. I tried not to think about what it looked like from the ground. The buildings are collapsing, the people running. The moment of realization that they were about to die, and there was nothing they could do about it. Direct hits on all primary targets, I reported. Structural damage exceeds 90%, moving to the secondary strike pattern. "Second wave, launch," Morrison ordered. The thermonuclear devices followed. Smaller yields, precision-targeted, designed to destroy hardened facilities that the kinetic strikes couldn't crack. Intelligence had identified these as underground bunkers, military research facilities and weapon production centers. The detonations lit up the planet's terminator line, brilliant white flashes that briefly outshone the red dwarf sun. Mushroom clouds rose into the atmosphere, spreading radioactive debris across regions that had been thriving ecosystems minutes ago. I counted 12 nuclear detonations, watching them spread across the tactical display like a disease. Each one represents thousands, maybe tens of thousands of deaths, each one poisoning the land for generations. It was beautiful, in a terrible way, like watching stars being born in reverse, like witnessing creation running backward into chaos. Radiation signatures within acceptable parameters, I reported. Fallout patterns matching projections. Strategic objectives achieved. The language we used was clean, clinical. No room for emotion or moral consideration, just facts and figures and objectives achieved. Third wave standing by, I reported. My voice was steady, professional. Gave no indication of the sick feeling growing in my stomach. Hold, Morrison said, scanning for response. We waited, sensors sweeping for return fire, for defensive measures, for any indication the aliens were launching a counterattack. This was the moment we'd trained for. The enemy response, the tactical dance of strike and counterstrike. Nothing. No missile launches, no energy weapon signatures, no defensive screens activating, no military response of any kind. Just silence and destruction. "They're not fighting back," Lieutenant Davis said over the tactical channel. Her voice carried confusion, uncertainty. "They're in shock," Morrison replied. "Or their military infrastructure is already destroyed. Standard doctrine calls for immediate retaliation. The fact that they haven't means we've successfully neutralized their offensive capabilities, maintained combat readiness." We waited another 10 minutes. The planet turned below us, revealing more of its surface. I could see the damage we'd caused, massive craters where cities had been, fires spreading across continents, dust clouds rising into the atmosphere, still no response. No counterattack, no defensive measures, just dying. "Sir," I said carefully, "the absence of a military response is unusual. Even with command infrastructure destroyed, we should be seeing local defensive action, automated systems, something." Morrison was silent for a moment. I could see her on the bridge feed, staring at the tactical display with an expression I couldn't read. "Maybe their military doctrine doesn't include automated response," she said finally. "Maybe they centralize all defensive control. Or maybe," she paused, "complete the operation. Fourth wave, launch, target remaining command and control centers." I hesitated, just for a second. But orders were orders, and hesitation in combat could cost lives, our lives. So I launched the fourth wave. The final strikes targeted what intelligence had identified as governmental centers, large structures in each major city, distinctive architecture, energy signatures consistent with high-level coordination and communication. In human terms, we were decapitating their government, ensuring they couldn't organize resistance or coordinate retaliation. When it was done, we'd hit 93% of designated targets, a successful operation by any military standard, clean execution, minimal risk to our forces, objectives achieved. I should have felt relieved, pride even. We'd neutralized an existential threat to humanity with minimal risk to our own forces. We'd done exactly what we were trained to do. Instead, I felt numb. The tactical display showed a planet transformed, where there had been cities and infrastructure and the lights of civilization. Now, there were craters and fires and spreading clouds of radioactive dust. We'd broken an entire world in 30 minutes. "All units, begin reconnaissance sweep," Morrison ordered. "I want eyes on every target zone. Confirm destruction. Look for any signs of military response or regrouping." The reconnaissance drones deployed, small, fast, equipped with high-resolution cameras and sensor arrays. They descended into Verath's atmosphere, transmitted data back in real time. What they showed us changed everything. The first drone reached what had been designated Target Alpha 1, a major military installation according to intelligence. The structures were destroyed exactly as planned. Massive crater where buildings had stood. debris scattered across kilometers, fires still burning in the wreckage. But the debris field didn't match military architecture. The buildings had windows, lots of them, large ones, suggesting natural light was important. And the wreckage showed signs of residential spaces, small rooms with furniture, what looked like recreational areas, green spaces that might have been parks. Tactical. Are you seeing this? Morrison's voice had lost its certainty. Confirmed. Target Alpha 1 appears to be primarily civilian infrastructure, residential and commercial structures, no obvious military purpose. Check the others. The other drones reported similar findings. Target after target, structure after structure. What we'd identified as military installations were cities. Just cities. Command centers were civic buildings, government offices maybe, or cultural centers. Industrial zones were manufacturing districts for consumer goods. Nothing we'd hit looked military. Nothing suggested weapon production or military training or strategic coordination. We'd destroyed a civilization's infrastructure, not military targets, not strategic objectives, everything. "Where are their weapons?" Lieutenant Davis asked. Her voice was small, shocked. "We didn't find any. No missile silos, no military bases, no weapon factories, no defensive installations, just cities and roads and agricultural facilities and everything a peaceful civilization needs to exist. And we destroyed 93% of it." "Survivors detected," the sensor officer reported. "Multiple locations, large groups. They're gathering in the open areas, away from structural damage. The drones showed us the survivors. They were gathered in the ruins of their cities, in the few structures that had escaped complete destruction, in parks and open squares where the kinetic strikes hadn't reached, in agricultural zones outside the urban centers. The visual feed was grainy but clear enough. They weren't soldiers, they were families. The aliens, the Verath, I learned their name later from the few transmissions we intercepted, were bipedal, roughly humanoid in structure. Shorter than humans, with elongated limbs and large eyes adapted to their red dwarf sun. Their skin was pale, almost translucent, with patterns that might have been natural or decorative, I couldn't tell. They wore clothing, simple garments in various colors. They carried children, small versions of themselves, clinging to adults with what looked like fear and confusion. They tended to be wounded, gathered in groups for comfort or protection, or simply because being alone in this catastrophe was too terrible to bear. Did all the things people do when their world ends. One image burned itself into my memory. A Verath adult, kneeling in rubble, holding something small and still. As a child, I realized. The small body wasn't moving. The adult was rocking slowly, making motions that might have been crying or keening or prayer. I zoomed in without thinking. The alien's face was turned toward the sky, toward us, watching from orbit. I couldn't read alien expressions, couldn't interpret biology, but I knew what I was seeing. Accusation, horror, the look of someone watching monsters, the look of someone who'd just watched their child die and couldn't understand why. "Sir," I said quietly, "I don't think they were preparing for war." Morrison was silent for a long moment. The bridge was absolutely quiet, everyone watching the feeds, seeing the same terrible truth. Then, "Get me a linguistic analysis team. I want that signal decoded properly. I want to know what they were actually saying, and I want it now." The urgency in her voice suggested she already knew. I already understood what we'd done, but needed confirmation. Needed to know for certain before she could process the magnitude of our mistake. It took the linguists 4 hours. 4 hours of watching survivors pull bodies from rubble. 4 hours of seeing the scale of destruction we'd caused. 4 hours of counting the dead and realizing the numbers were incomprehensible. When the linguistic team finally reported, their leader, a xenolinguist named Dr. Irish Smith, looked like she'd aged a decade. Her face was pale, her hands shaking as she pulled up the analysis. "The signal we interpreted as hostile military coordination," she began, her voice barely steady. "It wasn't. It was a cultural exchange program, a first contact protocol." She pulled up the decoded transmission. Mathematical patterns that we'd thought were weapon synchronization were actually a universal language. Prime numbers, geometric ratios, physical constants. The foundation for communication between species with no common reference. "They'd detected our presence decades ago," Dr. Smith continued. "Our radio signals, our electromagnetic signatures. They'd been observing us, studying us, the same way we'd been observing them, and 3 months ago, they decided to make contact." The complex patterns we'd interpreted as military coordination were information packages: article, music, mathematics, scientific data, cultural artifacts, everything a civilization might share when meeting another for the first time. They'd been saying, "We see you, we acknowledge you, we want to know you," and we'd heard, "We're coming to kill you." The large-scale construction we detected. Dr. Smith pulled up a new analysis. It wasn't military infrastructure. It was a transmission array, a more powerful version of their original signal. They were building it to send more detailed messages, visual data, complex cultural information. They were planning a comprehensive introduction to their civilization. She showed us images pulled from their transmissions, Verath art, landscapes of their world, images of their cities, the same cities we'd just obliterated, pictures of Verath children learning, playing, growing, family groups, cultural celebrations. They'd been trying to show us who they were, trying to bridge the gap between the species with everything they had to offer. "They were preparing for friendship," Dr. Smith said. Her voice broke. "They were excited. The transmissions show planning for delegations, cultural exchanges, and shared scientific research. They were preparing their population for first contact, teaching their children about humanity, building facilities to welcome us." The silence on the bridge was absolute. Everyone is processing the same terrible understanding. We hadn't defended ourselves. We hadn't prevented an attack. We hadn't saved humanity from an existential threat. We'd committed genocide based on a misunderstanding. We'd murdered 800 million people who were trying to say hello. "How many?" Morrison asked finally. Her voice was hollow, mechanical, the voice of someone who'd broken inside and was still functioning on pure discipline. The sensor officer checked his displays. His hands were shaking. "Estimated population before strike, approximately 800 million. Current survivor count, approximately 70 million, and dropping. Medical emergencies, structural collapses, radiation exposure. The number keeps falling. 730 million dead in the span of 30 minutes. Because we were afraid, because we assumed the worst, because we struck first and never asked questions, because we'd been so certain we were right." "Sir, the survivors are transmitting," the communications officer reported. "Multiple frequencies, broadband, They're not attacking. They're asking for help, medical assistance, rescue operations. They're broadcasting coordinates of survivors, requesting emergency supplies. They think..." The officer's voice broke completely. "They think we're here to help them. They think this was an accident, some kind of catastrophic failure. They're calling to us for rescue because they assume any species capable of spaceflight would help in a disaster like this. They don't understand we did this deliberately." I felt something crack inside me, some fundamental belief in the rightness of what we did, in the necessity of following orders, in the idea that authority knew best, and soldiers just had to trust the chain of command. The Verath survivors, pulled from the rubble of their obliterated civilization, were calling out to the ships in orbit because they assumed we'd come to help. They had no context for genocide, no framework for understanding that another species would do this deliberately. Their civilization had apparently never experienced anything like this, never faced an enemy that would destroy entire populations without warning or negotiation. They thought it was an accident, a natural disaster, something we'd help them recover from because that's what civilized beings did. They were calling for help from the people who'd murdered them. "What are your orders, Captain?" the XO asked. Commander Pierce looked shaken, his usual hard certainty gone. Morrison stared at the tactical display showing the ruined planet. I watched her face and saw the same realization I was processing. We'd just committed the worst atrocity in human history, and we'd done it following proper procedure, proper authorization, proper chain of command. We'd done everything right, according to military doctrine, and created absolute evil. "Deploy medical and rescue operations," Morrison said finally. Each word sounded like it was being torn out of her. "Every available resource. Get down there and save everyone we can." "Sir, Command will countermand that order. We're a military fleet, not a humanitarian mission. Fleet protocol quote." "Fuck fleet protocol." Morrison's voice cracked like a whip. "We just murdered 700 million people who were trying to be our friends. We're deploying rescue operations. We're saving every single survivor we can, and anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me personally. Sir, Command will relieve you. I don't care. Deploy now." "That's an order. Medical teams, rescue equipment, emergency supplies, everything. We're going down there and we're facing what we did." The rescue operation was chaotic. Our forces weren't equipped for humanitarian assistance on this scale. We had soldiers, not medics, weapons, not medical supplies, ships designed for destruction, not salvation. Our medical bays could handle combat casualties, a few dozen wounded at most, not 70 million disaster survivors. But we tried. I went down with the first wave, not because I was ordered to, but because I needed to see. I needed to face what I'd done, the targets I'd selected, the strikes I'd coordinated, the optimization algorithms I'd run to maximize destruction. I needed to see the results of my efficiency. The landing site was in what had been the northern population center, the place we'd hit first, hardest. Now it was just ruins, twisted metal and shattered stone, and fires that wouldn't stop burning despite having nothing left to burn. The air was thick with ash and smoke. Every breath tasted like death, burned organic matter and chemical fires and radioactive dust. My suit's filters were working overtime, and I could still taste it. The Verath survivors watched us land, large eyes tracking our dropships, bodies tensing with what might have been fear or hope, or both. They didn't run, didn't fight, just waited for help that should have come from their own government, except we'd vaporized that government along with everything else. I helped pull survivors from collapsed structures, worked alongside medics who were improvising triage protocols for alien physiology. The Verath were lighter than humans, their bodies more fragile, easier to carry, but also easier to injure. How many had died simply from the force of the shockwaves? How many broken bones, internal injuries, trauma that looked survivable, but would kill them slowly without proper treatment? And we didn't have proper treatment. We were guessing, extrapolating from their biology, hoping our medical interventions helped more than they hurt. One survivor approached me while I was clearing rubble. A young Verath, maybe an adolescent, I couldn't tell their age markers. She was holding something, a piece of fabric with intricate patterns, clutching it like it was the most precious thing in the world. She looked up at me with those enormous eyes and made a sound. Not words. I didn't speak their language, and my translator was struggling with the dialect. But tone is universal. She was asking for help, asking if I'd seen someone. I checked my scanner, looked for life signs in the direction she was indicating. Found nothing, just bodies and rubble and the spreading radiation signature that meant this area wasn't safe for much longer. I had to shake my head. I had to watch hope die in those alien eyes. Had to see her expression crumble as she understood that whoever she was looking for, parent, sibling, friend, was gone. She made another sound. This one I understood without translation. Why? I had no answer. How do you explain to a survivor that you murdered her family because you were afraid? Because you misunderstood? Because you were so certain of the threat that you never considered you might be wrong? How do you apologize for genocide? She turned away from me, still clutching that piece of fabric. Walked back toward a group of other survivors who were huddled in what might have been a park before the strikes. They gathered around her, offering whatever comfort they could in a world that had ended. And I stood there in the ruins, holding a piece of debris that used to be part of someone's home, and understood what I'd become. A murderer with good intentions. A killer who'd followed orders. A weapon that had been aimed at innocent people and pulled the trigger without asking questions. The Verath didn't fight back. That's what haunted me most. Even after they understood what we'd done, and they figured it out eventually, watching our military vessels in orbit, seeing soldiers instead of rescue workers, hearing translations of our communications. They didn't attack, didn't organize resistance, didn't try for revenge. They just survived, buried their dead in mass graves because there were too many for individual ceremonies, cared for their wounded with supplies we provided, using our resources to heal the injuries we'd caused, tried to rebuild in the shadow of the ships that had destroyed them. Some of them even thanked us for the medical assistance. Actually, thank you for saving a tiny fraction of the people we'd killed. The moral calculus was unbearable. We'd murdered 730 million people, and the survivors were grateful we were saving 70 million. They understood that we could have killed everyone, could have finished the job, and the fact that we were helping now somehow mattered to them. It made me sick, made me realize that the Verath were better than us, more forgiving, more capable of seeing good in the species that had nearly exterminated them. We didn't deserve their gratitude, we deserved their hatred, but they gave us grace instead, and that was somehow worse. Command recalled the fleet after 3 days, said we were overcommitted, that rescue operations weren't our mandate, that we needed to maintain military readiness in case the Verath did eventually retaliate. Morrison refused to leave. "We did this," she said during the command conference call. Her voice was steel. "We murdered these people. We're staying until every survivor has medical attention and shelter, until we've done everything possible to mitigate the catastrophe we caused." "Captain Morrison, you're operating outside your authority," Fleet Admiral Smith responded. His face on the screen was impassive, professional. He'd read the reports, knew what had happened, and was choosing doctrine over conscience. "Your orders were to neutralize a military threat. That objective is complete. Your secondary orders are to return for debriefing and strategic assessment." "My orders were based on false intelligence. We destroyed a peaceful civilization. I'm not abandoning the survivors." "Captain, you're relieved of command effective immediately. You will return to base for debriefing. The Retribution will withdraw under XO authority." Morrison looked at Commander Pierce, at me, at every officer on the bridge. "Anyone who wants to stay with me, speak now. I won't force you to disobey orders, but I'm not leaving these people. Someone needs to face what we did. Someone needs to take responsibility." 70% of the crew volunteered, including me. We stayed for 2 more weeks, worked alongside Verath survivors to establish emergency shelters, distribute supplies, and provide medical care. We taught them how to use our equipment. They taught us about their physiology, their needs, their culture. I learned that the Verath were a peaceful species. They'd had conflicts in their history, what civilization hasn't, but they'd moved past warfare centuries ago. Their society was built around cooperation, scientific advancement, and cultural exchange. They'd eliminated poverty and hunger. They'd achieved what humanity still dreamed of, and we'd destroyed it in 30 minutes. We were all court-martialed. Morrison got life imprisonment. The rest of us got various sentences ranging from 5 to 20 years. The official charge was insubordination and disobeying direct orders during military operations. They didn't charge us with genocide. That would have required admitting what we'd done. The trial was classified, closed court, no media, no public record. Just us and military judges who looked at us with expressions ranging from pity to contempt. Morrison's closing statement was simple. I followed my orders. I executed the operation exactly as authorized. And because of that, 730 million innocent people died. If that's not a crime, then our entire system is broken. If that's not worth punishment, then we're already monsters, and the uniform just makes it official. The judge sentenced her without comment. 25 years to life. She'd be eligible for parole when she was 63. She never applied for it. Died in prison 8 years later. Heart failure, the official report said. But I think she died of guilt, of carrying the weight of what we'd done until her body just gave out. Meanwhile, the operation was classified. The surviving Verath were quarantined on their ruined planet, forbidden contact with the rest of the galaxy. The official story was that Kepler 186 suffered a natural disaster, stellar flare activity, something plausible enough that nobody would look deeper. Humanity has to keep its moral high ground. We remained the victims, the defenders, the ones who did what was necessary to survive in a hostile galaxy, and the Verath became a footnote, an unfortunate accident, collateral damage in humanity's expansion into the stars. I'm recording this from a military prison on Titan. They gave me a comfortable cell with a window looking out at Saturn's rings. Access to basic amenities, educational materials. The guards are professional and polite. It's not a punishment really, just storage, keeping the people who know the truth somewhere they can't talk about it. But I'm talking about it now. This recording will be smuggled out by people who believe the truth matters more than security. It'll be distributed through networks command can't fully control. People will see it. Some will call it fabrication, propaganda, the ravings of a disgraced officer. Some will know it's true. I think about the Verath every day, about the city lights I watched go dark, about the small alien child asking me why her world had ended. About 730 million people died because we were afraid and arrogant and certain of our own righteousness. We destroyed an entire civilization because we couldn't imagine they might be peaceful, because we looked at their attempts at communication and saw only threats, because we valued our own survival so highly that we wouldn't risk the smallest chance of danger. We thought we were heroes, defenders. The good guys are doing the hard thing to keep humanity safe. We were monsters. And the worst part, we were monsters who followed all the rules, who obeyed orders, who did exactly what we were trained and authorized to do. The system worked perfectly, and it produced genocide. My name is Lieutenant Commander Jason Hart, former tactical officer on the CNS Retribution. War criminal by any honest definition. I'm recording this so someone remembers what we did, so the Verath don't disappear from history like they never existed. So maybe, possibly, humanity learns something before we do it again, because we will do it again. We're already looking at other signals from other systems, already interpreting, already calculating threats, already preparing first strikes. The Verath tried to reach out to us, tried to bridge the gap between species and offer friendship across the void. We murdered them for it, and I helped, followed orders, did my duty, optimized the killing. I can't undo it, can't bring back the dead, or rebuild their cities or erase the trauma from the survivors. All I can do is tell the truth. We were wrong, catastrophically, unforgivably wrong, and they were innocent. We thought victory meant power. We thought strength meant security. We thought striking first meant staying safe. What we learned, what I learned in those ruins, holding dying aliens who couldn't understand why we'd done this, is that war doesn't care who's right. It just cares who's left standing. And sometimes, being left standing makes you the villain. The recording ends here. But the memory doesn't. It never will.